So, the next 15 minutes or so, I want to tell you about why I think we're heading for the most golden of golden ages in hospitality. We're going to fly through a bunch of things. I've got 30 slides to get through in my 15 minutes. We're going to be talking about structural employment, talking about how artificial intelligence is going to impact on that, introduce you to the experience economy, and then finally, the role hospitality has in all this. So when economists talk about employment structure, they break it down into three sectors. There's the primary sector, which is primarily agriculture with a bit of extractive industries, oil and gas, minerals, that kind of stuff. The secondary sector, which is manufacturing, and the tertiary sector, services. Now, all of the slides I've got for you are on the UK. Partly that's because it was easy for me to get hold of that data, and partly the UK is an excellent example because, of course, it was the first country to industrialise. This is agricultural employment in the UK over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, it was 5% of total employment. It's less than 1% today. If we go back sort of 250, 300 years, 3/4 of the workforce were in the fields. Over that 100 years, however, despite fewer employees, the actual output has gone up. I mean, often I think people make the mistake of thinking output goes down just because the number of people working in it goes down. Very similar pattern in terms of manufacturing. We've gone from just under a third of the workforce 100 years ago to today under 10% in the UK. And despite all you hear, our output in manufacturing is actually going up, except for the last couple of years, according to the data I compiled in here. And probably that's driven by us having the most expensive energy prices in the world in the UK. Our industrial electricity prices are top every other country. This is services employment, picking up the slack from agriculture and manufacturing. And just as manufacturing and agriculture have continued to increase their output, so too have services. And the output has risen at a faster rate than the increase in employees. And what we see is this almost exponential graph as a result. And here's the official data in terms of services: 4/5 of output, 4/5 of employment. This is how the Office for National Statistics, the official government data body, this is how they classify employment. It's a bit hard to make sense of that. This is perhaps a better way of looking at things. We're going to break that services sector down into three parts. This is taken from Paul Slattery's book. Many of you will know him. His former academic turned investment banker was due to speak today, but unfortunately a family bereavement means he couldn't make it today. So the first of those subsectors, citizen services, this is basically everything that the government spends. The biggest component of which, of course, is our healthcare system, but includes education, defence, welfare, everything that local and national government supplies. We have a challenge with this, and that's our tax burden is at an all-time high. It's quite tricky to see how we're going to be growing employment in citizen services. I'm suggesting that for the sake of my argument today that we can look at a relatively flat line in terms of employment for citizen services. The second category is market services, and this is a very broad definition. Probably easiest to understand, it's everything that isn't citizen services and everything that isn't the experience economy, which I'm about to introduce in a moment. The biggest single job category within that is retail. As we know, that's been on a sort of 2-decade decline in terms of employment numbers, thanks to earlier technological disruption, e-commerce. The next area, the biggest area within market services is I put under the heading office jobs. That's everything from sort of clerical work all the way through to professional services, investment bankers, lawyers, etc., etc. And there's a very small sector within market services which is in growth, and that's personal services. But I'm going to contend that the net outlook for employment in market services is going to be down. And why it's going to be down is the rise of generative AI. Now, this is hugely hyped. There's a lot of discussion about it. There's debate. Are we going to see this? The current Nobel laureate, Darren Osameglu, he argues, he thinks it's overhyped. At the same time, another Nobel laureate for chemistry, Demis Hassabis, he used AlphaFold, AI-based technology, to win his prize. So you've got contradictions within there. But what we can see, I think, overall is a consensus that there is significant disruption ahead. We have been here before in terms of office jobs disruption. What you're looking at here is an Excel spreadsheet, 1960 style. What everybody is doing with those old-fashioned adding machines, I don't think any of you will entered the workplace to remember those. They all went, of course. They've got those manila brown internal mail envelopes, and that was replaced with email. I'm not sure that's made us more productive, but the theory is it has. And what happened here, in actual fact, more office jobs were created. They got more productive. And this is one argument you hear about AI. It actually augments rather than replaces. However, as we know, technology can replace. And I'll give you an example here of the automatic lift. Now, quite remarkably, I think, for many people to think that this is a major job category, and this is US data, elevator operators. And just before the Second World War, the automatic lift was invented, and you see here the decline in elevator operators. So they disappeared essentially by the mid-1960s. Now, Goldman Sachs, as reported here by the BBC, said 18 months ago, 300 million jobs effectively, this is globally, were set to go as a result of generative AI. They were looking out at what the impact of that technology was and how it could replace what people are doing. This is that Goldman Sachs report. The good news, if that's the bad news in terms of job losses, is actually the wealth creation that we're going to see. Something like 7% of global wealth, the equivalent of, is going to be added thanks to this AI. It's about 7 trillion US dollars. And the good news is, for our sector, that it's not being spent supporting manufacturing. We've got enough stuff. We're not going to be buying things. Rich people in rich countries, and we're talking certainly the top third and probably the top half of people rich of the top end of the income distribution scale in rich countries, they're at the top of that pyramid there, that Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's that self-actualization part. And what we mean by self-actualization is the experience economy. And this is the definitive book on that, Joe Pine, Jim Gilmore. And this is the original Harvard Business Review article back in 1998 they wrote. I think I'll draw your attention to is in that far right column there, talking about the experience economy. You need to understand that it's not PlayStation, it's not Netflix. It has to happen out of home. It needs a stage. And certainly those stages can be a football stadium, they can be a theatre stage like the one I'm standing on now. But even then within that, that is supported by the experience economy as we define it within hospitality. And it's our bars, it's our restaurants, it's our hotels. Now, I want to talk just very briefly as well about a problem we have in our economy right now, which I think hospitality is in a good position to fix. And this comes from, if you think about politics, particularly in the 20th century, what the political debate was about was what the share was going to capital, what the share was going to Labour. And we had a settlement in the 1980s. We went through that period of low growth, high inflation. Sounds familiar to where we are today. And the settlement was, we're going to give a bigger share to capital, get them reinvesting, and that will turbo boost the economy. That worked up to a point, certainly up until the global financial crisis. the problem has been in terms of what it's meant in distribution terms, in that share going to Labour has decreased. And it's got worse in that the top 20% on income distribution, their position has been fine. In fact, they've seen their real incomes grow over the last few decades. For the bottom 50%, however, it's been a case of stagnation. And this is what I would suggest it's led to, this political turmoil we currently have, where the left, which traditionally represented the interests of working people, actually they've failed in their mission to protect their interests. And working people are angry and they're turning to populists. Now, this is a book, David Goodhart, his previous book, The Road to Somewhere, I think was one of the best explanations of why we did Brexit in the UK. Now, I think any economist looks at the numbers and says rationally, it was an act of self-harm, Brexit. Why did we do it? Why did the British people vote for it? Goodhart's explanation of that was about the alienation of that bottom 50% on that income scale. His next book here, where he talks about head, hand and heart, what he's talking about is this over-reward for the cognitive skills. So that top 20%, the cognitive elite, if you like, who have seen their real incomes go up, he's saying, well, this is a big problem for society. We're not recognizing people working with their hands, people working with their heart. And of course, in our sector, it's chefs, it's front of house. So in conclusion, then I'm going to leave you with three thoughts. The first is about hospitality real estate and where that sits in the overall ecosystem of real estate investment. Now, the office sector has been through a rather disruptive period thanks to work from home. If I'm even half right, and more importantly, smarter people than me, such as the economists at Goldman Sachs, are even half right, we are going to see a much more disruptive period for the office sector. 40% of commercial real estate is going to have a very bad time in the years ahead. The second thing I'd like to highlight is how this change to generative AI is going to put wind behind our sector. That extra money that's being created thanks to AI, that productivity piece, and any economist will tell you it's productivity that grows wealth. That wealth is going to get spent in our sector. And the final thing I'd like to leave you with is about how hospitality is part of the solution to all of these problems we have. We are not only the future of jobs, but we're actually the future of dignity and respect for that bottom 50% on the income distribution as they are better recognized. With that, thank you for listening.